The rain came down in sheets that November evening, turning the Chicago streets into rivers of neon and shadow. I'd walked past her 100 times before, maybe 1,000, always in the same spot beneath the overhang of the old Morrison building, always with that same threadbare blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. But that night something made me stop. Maybe it was the way she was crying, her thin frame shaking with sobs that even the storm couldn't drown out. Or maybe it was because I'd finally hit rock bottom myself and recognized the sound of another breaking heart. "Ma'am?" I heard myself say, my voice barely audible over the downpour. "Are you okay?" She looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much, eyes that should have been weathered by bitterness but somehow still held a glimmer of something I couldn't quite name. She was older than I'd thought, maybe 60 with silver hair plastered to her forehead and hands that trembled as she wiped her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. It's just, today would have been her birthday. My daughter. She would have been 35. I should have walked away. I was late for my shift at the warehouse. The third job I'd taken since my wife left and took half of everything with her. I had my own problems, my own debts, my own reasons to keep my head down and my heart closed. But something in her voice, in the way she said would have been, made me sink down onto the cold concrete beside her. "Tell me about her," I said. And she did. Her name was Sarah, and she'd been a teacher. Kindergarten. She'd loved children, loved their laughter and their questions and the way they saw the world as full of possibilities instead of problems. She died 5 years ago in a car accident, coming home from a parent-teacher conference on a rainy night not unlike this one. The woman beside me, her name was Margaret, had been homeless ever since. Not because she had to be, she explained, but because she couldn't bear to live in the apartment where Sarah had grown up, couldn't stand to be surrounded by memories that felt more like ghosts. "I had savings," Margaret said, her voice steadier now. "I gave most of it away, to the school where Sarah taught. They named the library after her." She smiled then, and it transformed her face. She would have loved that. A room full of books and children. That was her heaven. We sat there in the rain for over an hour, two strangers sharing the weight of our broken pieces. I told her about my divorce, about the house I'd lost, about the daughter I barely got to see anymore because I was always working, always trying to dig myself out of the hole I'd fallen into. Margaret listened the way Sarah must have listened to her students, with her whole heart, without judgment, as if my story was the most important thing in the world. When I finally stood to leave, Margaret reached into a small bag she kept hidden under her blanket and pulled out a worn envelope. "Take this," she said. "I can't. Please." Her eyes were urgent now. "I've been carrying it for months, waiting for the right person." "You're him." "I know you are." Inside the envelope was $300 in wrinkled bills and a note in elegant handwriting. "For someone who needs a second chance. Pay it forward when you can. Sarah." I stared at the money, my throat tight. Margaret, this is too much. I can't take this." "You can," she said firmly. "And you will. Because that's what Sarah would have wanted. That's what she lived for. Helping people find their way back to themselves." I tried to give it back, but Margaret refused. Instead, she made me promise something. "When you get back on your feet," she said, "find someone else who's lost. Help them the way Sarah would have. That's all I ask." I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Margaret, about Sarah, about the strange twist of fate that had made me stop on that rainy corner. The next morning, I called my ex-wife. We'd barely spoken in months. Our conversations reduced to terse text messages about pickup times and school forms. But I told her about Margaret, about Sarah, about the $300 that had been given to me by a homeless woman who had every reason to be bitter but chose kindness instead. "I want to do better," I told her. "For Emma, for us. I know I can't fix what's broken, but I can try to be the father our daughter deserves." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that changed everything. "Emma asks about you every night. She wants to know why you're never home, why you don't come to her soccer games anymore. I tell her you're working, but she's 8 years old. Jake, she doesn't understand why work is more important than she is." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been so focused on making money, on proving I could survive the divorce, that I'd forgotten what actually mattered. That night, instead of going to my warehouse shift, I showed up at Emma's soccer game. She almost didn't recognize me at first. Then she scored a goal and ran to the sidelines. Her face lit up like the sun and threw her arms around me. "You came," she kept saying. "Daddy, you came." I used Margaret's money to cut back on my hours, to rearrange my life so I could be present for my daughter. It wasn't easy. I had to make sacrifices. Had to let go of my pride and ask my ex-wife if we could work together to co-parent instead of fighting each other at every turn. But slowly, week by week, things began to change. Emma started smiling again. My ex-wife and I started talking, really talking, for the first time in years. And I started to remember who I'd been before the weight of failure had crushed me into someone I didn't recognize. 6 months later, I went back to the Morrison building. I'd been there every week since that rainy November night, bringing Margaret hot meals, warm clothes, sometimes just sitting with her to talk. But this time I had something different. I'd gotten a promotion at my main job, one that paid enough that I could finally let go of the warehouse shifts. And I'd saved up enough for a security deposit on a small apartment. Not for me, but for Margaret. "You don't belong on these streets," I told her. "Let me help you the way you helped me." She cried again, but this time they were different tears. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "Being here, it feels like I'm still close to Sarah somehow. Like I'm doing penance for surviving when she didn't." "Sarah didn't die so you could punish yourself," I said gently. "She died doing what she loved, taking care of others. The best way to honor her is to take care of yourself, to live the life she would have wanted for you." It took weeks of convincing, of small steps and setbacks, but eventually Margaret agreed. We found her a studio apartment near the school where Sarah had taught, close enough that Margaret could volunteer. In the library they'd named after her daughter. She started reading to the children during lunch breaks, her voice strong and clear as she brought stories to life. For a new generation of students who never knew Sarah but benefited from her legacy anyway. The last time I saw Margaret, she was surrounded by kindergartners, their small hands reaching up to turn the pages of a picture book, their eyes wide with wonder. She looked different, not younger exactly, but lighter, as if a weight she'd been carrying had finally been lifted. When she saw me watching from the doorway, she smiled and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." But she had it backward. I was the one who should have been grateful, because on that rainy November night, Margaret had given me more than $300. She'd given me permission to be human again, to stumble and fall and ask for help. She'd shown me that kindness isn't about having everything figured out or being strong enough to handle life alone. It's about showing up for each other, about choosing connection over isolation, about believing that broken people can put each other back together if they're willing to try. These days, I keep Sarah's note in my wallet, right next to a picture of Emma scoring that soccer goal. And whenever I see someone struggling, someone lost, someone sitting alone in the rain with their heart breaking, I remember Margaret's promise. Find someone who needs a second chance and help them find their way back to themselves. Because that's what she did for me. That's what humanity looks like when we strip away everything else. One broken person, reaching out to another, saying without words, "You're not alone. You matter. Your story isn't over yet." Her name was Margaret, but she could have been anyone. She could have been me. She could have been you. That's the thing about kindness. It doesn't require perfection or wealth or even stability. It just requires showing up, being present, and believing that every person you meet is carrying a story worth hearing, a burden worth sharing, a light worth protecting from the storm. And sometimes, on the worst nights of your life, that's enough to change everything.